Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order can emerge, a new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace. An era in which the nations of the world, east and west, north and south, can prosper and live in harmony. 100 generations have searched for this elusive path to peace, while 1,000 wars raged across the span of human endeavor.
That was Mozart.
And today that new world is struggling to be born. A world quite different from the one we've known. A world where the rule of law supplants the rule of the jungle. A world in which nations recognize the shared responsibility for freedom and justice. A world where the strong respect the rights of the weak.
Sorry, I didn't know you wrote that. I didn't. That was Mozart.
When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
That was Mozart.
Order, in its nuclear form, is simply the relation between a set of elements. However, that definition is too wide for us, so we will not use it very much. After all, using this definition would mean that every state of chaos is simply a differing order. So instead, we will put our focus on consistency, making it as the opposite of chaos. Whereas chaos is complete but inconsistent, order is consistent but incomplete. A room may serve again as a helpful allegory, where in a chaotic room everything can be fit by simply tossing it in an orderly room every added piece has to be given a special place. On the other hand, it is hard to find anything in a chaotic room, whilst in an orderly room we simply go to a thing's allocated space to retrieve it. The symbol of order is the tree. A tree is also from where we get the word true, as both a tree and a truthful thing grow out and bear fruit. So now one may see that true and wrong really are statements of effectiveness and not ethical. However, a tree also gives other hints to the nature of order. Its endurance contrasts the ambivalent nature of chaos, and its makeup shows that all of it derives from, or rests upon, its stem, giving it an inborn hierarchy. The tree is one of the richest symbols in all of symbology, and part of almost every religion. Those interested may simply visit the Wikipedia page on the Tree of Life and the World Tree, which I will put in the description. The important note on these symbologies is that the tree takes up the vertical axis, the connecting point between heaven and earth. It is for that reason that in Catholicism the Tree of Life is associated with Jesus and the crucifixion, and the Eucharist with the fruits of the Tree of Life. This is because in Christianity, the crucifixion and the sacraments are the central meeting points of heaven and earth. Generally speaking, no matter the highest good of any creed or religion, it is generally referred to its recipients through a tree. To Christians, there might come to mind the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and its disastrous fruit. Here the tree symbol takes the same form, connecting heaven and earth. However, it must be seen as the catapult into the sun, or the wings of Icarus that, in the end, leave the wearer dead on the ground. So the tree of knowledge leads to the fall of humanity and to the disconnection from the tree of life. And the Logos makes itself into a new tree of life to reconnect the lost bond. The world tree is the aspect of the tree as the ordering component, keeping the realms in order. The world tree is a staple of every Indo-European or Aryan religion and generally shows how Earth fits in between the spiritual realms. It is again the connector of heaven, earth, and underworld. However, in this case, it also holds each at its proper place. To Christians, this might seem like a pure pagan concept, but our name for it is simply Logos, or Jesus, and it doesn't seem like a coincidence to me that in becoming flesh, his pinnacle act took the form of a tree in the crucifixion. Another item that is relevant here is the scepter, the baton, the crosier or shepherd's staff, and a myriad of other staffs of authority. These also correspond to the tree symbol, and the holder very much holds the tree in his hands, being the one that either controls or maintains it. They also relate to the torch symbol. To get further into the symbol of the tree, however, we might abandon the idea of the physical tree and rather look at the concept of the family tree, or a more accurate modern description of it, the tree data structure. These have the inherent property of recursion. In easy terms, this means that the same pattern is repeated over and over again to theoretical infinity. I do recommend that you visit the Recursion Wikipedia page after watching this video, as, having seen this one and the last one, you might find the images and their related descriptions quite interesting. Going back to recursion, a fractal may be described as a perfectly recursive object, wherein a pattern is extended by recursive repetition of itself. So a fractal might be seen as a perfect tree. Fractals, in turn, are everywhere in the world. In nature, leaves and snowflakes are pure fractals. Waves, dunes, light, and gravity all take on the same oscillating form of the wave. Crystals are periodic patterns, which is why diamonds also represent perfect order. Honeycombs follow tessellation, which is recursion of a 2D pattern. And there's of course the pattern of orbiting, which describes the structure of galaxies, solar systems, planetary systems, hurricanes, and atoms. In psychospirituality, we can model an unconscious mind by replacing the nodes with people, which means that every group of people that exchanges an input amongst members and gives an output can be described as an unconscious being. Of course, we can construct an even bigger consciousness from this group, and so on and so forth. This method is what, for example, organized militaries in the Roman Empire and still does so today. The point is that we should think of our reality as fractal in nature, and where there's a fractal, we can map it on a tree. This hypothetical tree now gives us different layers to play with. For example, in the prior example of the military, the individual would be at the lowest level, followed by the first group and the next level, the next group at the next, and so forth. Here we are going up the tree, or up in the layers of abstraction. This maneuvering of the layers is also integral to understand not only Christianity but most religions in the world. Here are some Christian examples. In the Church, every bishop is a reiteration of the Pope, who in turn is part of the recursive line of the succession of Peter. Peter, as one of the apostles, has received the fire at Pentecost, which can be understood as a torch handed down by Jesus. So the Pope passes on the torch to the bishops on the global level, who in turn pass on the torch to their flock on the communal level. This procession, to be accurate, is from bishops to fathers, who in turn take on the bishop role on the family level. From the father it is given to the family members on the personal level. And to go even further, it is given to the conscious mind, which gives it to the unconscious mind on the internal level. Notice that this line is completely male except for its last element. And that is not a coincidence. You will understand why it has to be this way at the end of the video. Another such line would be God's identity as the kingdom. In the image of God, and we have to remember that God also is the kingdom, there's Adam. And Adam is both the name of the man in Eden, but also the word for all of humanity. Then in the image of Adam, there are the nations. In the image of the nations, there are the families. And in the image of the families, there's the individual. This procession is also fully male. And by the way, somewhat shared by Chinese philosophy, where the individual is thought of as an empire, with the heart being its emperor. The previously discussed matter of typology also factors into this. Remember that, for example, the Ark of the Covenant is a type of the Virgin Mary, or that Pharaoh is a type of the Antichrist. As said before, these are lower order reiterations of their higher order principles. Understanding this typology also means that one can understand what it means for a priest to be in persona Christi. It simply means that the priest becomes a lower order iteration of Christ. So now that we have made some examples, we can talk about what we are actually doing here. Navigating such a tree, we can always go up or down, and I can already hear computer science people seething at this comment. Anyways, going up means that we abstract or generalize, and going down means that we specialize or atomize. As an example, the sword from episode 01 generalizes into the class of weapon, so a more generalized telling of a man with a legendary sword is a man with a legendary weapon. The sword specializes into, for example, a spear, which only carries on its piercing aspect. Here we can see that upon specialization, the object usually loses resolution, whilst upon generalization, it starts to blur. And this attribute can be well thought of as symbolized by image compression. So you can think of yourself as a low poly reiteration of God. You could also think of this in terms of mathematics, where a derivative is a specialization and an integral is a generalization. Their words, deriving and integrating, are actually synonymous with specializing and generalizing respectively. So, for example, in Christianity, from the character of Moses, we might derive the generic attribute of wielding a staff, and we can integrate Moses with all other necessary aspects into the totality of Jesus. Now, before we continue, a lot of people want to assign a gender to order and chaos. And as such, they are generally engendered as masculine order and feminine chaos. However, that is a simplistic view, and so we will augment it a bit. The masculine side is that which strives for order, and the feminine side is that which holds order. So a woman has to be and a man has to become. This, by the way, is also why women are traditionally seen as delicate, because they are leveled at the point at which they are. And the accrual of order is done by the male into the female, which is why Bishop Sheen says that the level of a civilization is the level of its womanhood. In Christianity, we can also see this by God putting himself into the perfect female, Mary, who is full of grace. However, a female can also obtain no order at all, at which point she is associated with the dragon of chaos. Furthermore, the masculine element is the specializing element, which is why men look under the hoods of their cars, and the feminine element is the generalizing element. Of course, these are just the abstract elements, and there might be differentiations on the personal level, as a man is not the masculine element and a woman is not the feminine element. Our modern society is one that spiritually only recognizes the masculine element, which is, by the way, why we have feminists, and it is for that reason that generalizations are seen as the acts of the unenlightened, while scientists, whose entire job can be summed up as continuous debriving, are seen as spiritual guides. Now, going back to the idea of order, I want to point out that in a fractal order, the way to perpetuate the order is by repeating the pattern in question. This means that to become part of any order, you have to more or less become the order itself. In Christianity, this is what is meant by carrying one's cross behind Christ and taking the mustard seed into one's heart. This is also how the Christian might best understand the idea of sin. Sin in Christianity is simply coming short of God or the lack of God. Now, a person can theoretically be without sin, as for example Mary was, and yet they still will not be God. Instead, what this means is that they fully resemble God on their level. The inverse of sin is grace, so being full of grace means being without sin, and grace in return can be modeled as God's vanity, because God bestows grace upon something to the degree to which it mirrors Him at its own level. And here again we can see the fractal behavior of accordance with God. I also want to point out that Christian heaven is strictly hierarchical. It is generally seen as organized into 9 so-called choirs, which are basically ranks of heavenly host members, going from closest to God, the Nephilim, to furthest from God, the angels. And each member is also generally seen as being assigned a rank from first to last. So there is a single first member, a single second member, and so forth, all the way to the last angel. This means that heaven is fully discriminatory, but in return, every member is generally regarded as exceptional or fully unique. And pondering a bit on the idea of an eternal non-physical being might lay at hand why that more or less has to be the case. Where chaos is associated with the left, order is associated with the right. That is why we say that something is right. This is also where the political right gets its name from. Legal rights also get their name here, as well as the 90-degree angle, which is called the right angle. In Germany, we will say Recht haben and richtig, and even more on the nose, in Ordnung. Rights are also called Rechte, and the right angle is also called rechter Winkel. Here's some interesting food for thought. In Germany, in 1919, the first Waldorf school opened. These were a new type of school envisioned by one Rudolf Steiner, an esoteric and self-proclaimed clairvoyant whose spiritual beliefs were rooted in theosophy, Eastern mysticism, and all the other schools of thought that came to prominence in the early 20th century, and later would make up the backbone of German World War II era esoteric thought. They were agnostic and, from our current perspective, very New Agey. Nowadays, there are Waldorf schools all over Germany, most built for that purpose from scratch. In these newly built schools, you will find not a single 90-degree angle in the architecture, and that is completely on purpose. To finish this video off, I want to draw attention to the conception of the rigid order or finished order, also called perfect order, where I would say that that name is a bit of a misnomer. This concept is often symbolized by a cube, built from nothing but 90-degree angles. It is also symbolized by Saturn or Kronos, types of the tyrannical father who consumes his children. In Christianity, it is associated with Rome and 666, and I will link a very good video by Jonathan Pageau on his take on 666. It is also associated with Lucifer and the light of Lucifer, as light is generally seen as a symbol of order. Interestingly, it is also associated with Baal, who is usually associated with chaos. Rigid order might best be described in the blog post Meditations on Moloch by Slate Star Codex, and I will round this video out by reading some excerpts from it. Meditations on Moloch. 1. Allen Ginsberg's famous poem on Moloch. What sphinx of cement and aluminium bashed open their skulls and ate their brain and imagination? Moloch, solitude, filth, ugliness, ash cans and unobtainable dollars, children screaming under the stairways, boys sobbing in armies, old men weeping in the parks. Moloch, Moloch, nightmare of Moloch, Moloch the loveless, mental Moloch, Moloch the heavy, judger of men. Moloch the incomprehensible prison, Moloch the crossbones, soulless jailhouse and congress of sorrows, Moloch whose building are judgment, Moloch the vast stone of war, Moloch the stunned governments, Moloch whose mind is pure machinery, Moloch whose blood is running money, Moloch whose fingers are 10 armies, Moloch whose breasts is a cannibal dynamo, Moloch whose ear is a smoking tomb, Moloch whose eyes are 1,000 blind windows, Moloch whose skyscrapers stand in the long streets like endless Jehovahs, Moloch whose factories dream and croak in the fog, Moloch whose smokestacks and antennae crown the cities, Moloch whose love is endless oil and stone, Moloch whose soul is electricity and banks, Moloch whose poverty is the spectre of genius, Moloch whose fate is a cloud of sexless hydrogen, Moloch whose name is the mind, Moloch in whom I sit lonely, Moloch in whom I dream angels, crazy in Moloch, cocksucker in Moloch, lacklove and madness in Moloch, Moloch who entered my soul early, Moloch in whom I am conscious without a body, Moloch who frightened me out of my natural ecstasy, Moloch whom I abandon. Wake up in Moloch, light streaming out of the sky. Moloch, Moloch, robot apartments, invisible suburbs, skeleton treasuries, blind capitals, demonic industries, spectral nations, invincible madhouses, granite cocks, monstrous bombs. They broke their backs lifting Moloch to heaven. Pavements, trees, radios, tons, lifting the city to heaven which exists and is everywhere about us. Visions, omens, hallucinations, miracles, ecstasies, gone down the American river. Dreams, adorations, illuminations, religion, the whole boatload of sensitive bullshit. Breakthroughs, over the river, flips and crucifixions, gone down the flood. Highs, epiphanies, despairs. 10 years animal screams and suicides. Minds, new loves, mad generation, down on the rocks of time. Real holy laughter in the river. They saw it all, the wild eyes, the holy yells. They bade farewell. They jumped off the roof, to solitude, waving, carrying flowers down to the river, into the street. What always impressed me about this poem is its conception of civilization as an individual entity. You can almost see him, with his fingers of armies and his skyscraper window eyes. A lot of the commentators say Moloch represents capitalism. This is definitely a piece of it, even a big piece, but it doesn't quite fit. Capitalism, whose fate is a cloud of sexless hydrogen? Capitalism in whom I am conscious without a body? Capitalism, therefore granite cocks? Moloch is introduced as the answer to a question. C.S. Lewis' question in Hierarchy of Philosophers. What does it? Earth could be fair and all men glad and wise. Instead we have prisons, smokestacks, silence. What sphinx of cement and aluminium breaks open their skulls and eats up their imagination? And Ginsberg answers, Moloch does it. There's a passage in the Principia Discordia where Malaclips contains the goddess about the evils of human society. Everyone is hurting each other. The planet is rampant with injustices. Whole societies plunder groups of their own people. Mothers imprison sons. Children perish while brothers war. The goddess answers, what is the matter with that, if that's what you want to do? Malaclips, but nobody wants it. Everybody hates it. Goddess, oh well, then stop. The implicit question is, if everyone hates the current system, who perpetuates it? And Ginsberg answers, Moloch. It's powerful not because it's correct. Nobody literally thinks an ancient Carthaginian demon causes everything, but because thinking of the system as an agent throws into relief the degree to which the system isn't an agent. Bostrom makes an offhanded reference of the possibility of a dictatorless dystopia, one that every single citizen, including the leadership, hates, but which nevertheless endures unconquered. It's easy enough to imagine such a state. Imagine a country with two rules. First, every person must spend 8 hours a day giving themselves strong electric shocks. Second, if anyone fails to follow a rule, including this one, or speaks out against it, or fails to enforce it, all citizens must unite to kill that person. Suppose these rules were well enough established by tradition that everyone expected them to be enforced. So you shock yourself for 8 hours a day, because you know that if you don't, everyone else will kill you. Because if they don't, everyone else will kill them, and so on. Every single citizen hates the system, but for a lack of a good coordination mechanism, it endures. From a God's eye view, we can optimize the system to everyone agrees to stop doing this at once, but no one within the system is able to effect the transition without great risk to themselves.